All right, let me tell you something that most people are too scared to say out loud. This isn't about playing safe. This isn't about sugar coating the truth. This is about looking reality dead in the eye and saying, I see you and I'm not afraid. Because what just happened in the global economy isn't some small ripple in a pond. It's a full-blown earthquake. America's stock market, it didn't just stumble. It didn't just trip over its own shoelaces. It crashed. And the trigger, not oil prices, not some Wall Street scandal, not a random political speech, no. The match that lit this fire came from halfway across the world, from a country most American analysts underestimated for decades, India. And it all began with a tariff war. Now, people love to make economic collapse sound like some mysterious act of nature, like a hurricane you couldn't see coming. But if you've been paying attention, you'd know this wasn't a surprise. This was years in the making. The United States has been running on a system of economic dominance for decades. Control the currency, control the markets, control the trade routes. And as long as everyone played along, the system held up. But here's the thing. Systems like that only work when everyone believes they have no choice but to comply. And India just told America, we're not playing your game anymore. That's when the dominoes started falling. So what actually happened? Let's break it down without the Wall Street jargon that confuses people on purpose. America slapped tariffs on Indian goods, thinking it would pressure India into submission. That's been the playbook for decades. Use tariffs to make it too expensive for a smaller economy to fight back. But India is not that small economy anymore. India turned around and said, all right, you want to play that game. Let's see how you like it when we hit you where it hurts. And they did. India didn't just respond with equal tariffs. They strategically targeted sectors that the U.S. couldn't afford to lose. High-tech components, rare earth minerals, pharmaceuticals, agricultural imports. Suddenly, American companies that relied on Indian goods woke up to a nightmare. Think about it. You're an American CEO. You've got your supply chains running smoothly for years. Your factories rely on low-cost, high-quality imports from India, and overnight BAM. Prices skyrocket. Your production slows down. Your customers can't get their products. Your investors start panicking, and Wall Street is fueled by one thing, confidence. Once that confidence cracks, it doesn't matter how good your spread sheets look, the market starts free-falling. And that's exactly what happened. Investors pulled out, shares tumbled, the Dow Jones dropped like a stone in water, the Nasdaq bled red all over the screens, the S/P 500, same story, billions wiped out in hours. Now here's the part nobody wants to admit. This crash wasn't just about the tariffs. The tariffs were the spark, but the fuel was already there. America's markets were already inflated, over-leveraged, dependent on cheap imports and global compliance. When India refused to bow, it sent a message to the entire world. If India can fight back, so can others, and that's when you saw ripple effects. Countries that had been quietly unhappy with U.S. trade dominance suddenly started rethinking their strategies. Maybe, they thought, we don't have to take the short end of the stick anymore. And that's when America's economic armor started cracking in more places than one. But let me tell you something even more important. This wasn't just about economics. This was psychological. For decades, America's strategy has been to make every country believe that resisting them is economic suicide. And then India came along and didn't just survive the pushback, it started thriving. And that's dangerous for the old system, because once people see an alternative, they start questioning the rules they've been living under. That's when control starts slipping away. Here's the deeper layer that most TV pundits won't even touch. America is terrified of losing the narrative because in economics, perception is power. If the world believes you're untouchable, they'll trade with you, invest in you, align with you. But the moment that belief fades, the game changes. Investors start diversifying away from your markets. Countries start building alliances without you, and that's exactly what's starting to happen. India's stand wasn't just about protecting its exports. It was about rewriting the rules of trade. And when you rewrite the rules, the old champion doesn't automatically win. Now, let's talk about the human side, because we can't just sit here throwing around stock indexes and GDP figures and forget that this crash affects real people. When the market collapses, retirement savings shrink. Small investors lose years of hard-earned money. Companies start cutting jobs to survive. In America, that's already happening. Layoffs are being announced left and right. Manufacturing orders are being cancelled. People are looking at their 401ks and wondering if they'll ever recover. This is the part where the big guys on Wall Street start saying, it's just a market correction. But let me tell you, for the average working class person, there's nothing just about losing your job or your savings. Meanwhile, in India, something else is happening. Confidence is rising. People are seeing that standing up to the biggest economic power in the world didn't end in disaster. It ended in leverage. Indian companies are now negotiating better deals with alternative markets. They're exploring partnerships with countries America has neglected or even alienated. Supply chains are being reoriented. And while America scrambles to contain the damage, India is quietly building a new trade network that doesn't depend on American approval. Now, some people will say, but won't India suffer too? Of course. No country comes out of a trade war completely unscathed. But here's the difference. India went into this prepared. Over the last decade, it's been diversifying its economy, investing in manufacturing, building self-reliance in critical sectors. America thought tariffs would corner India, but India had already built escape routes. It's like trying to trap someone in a room only to find out they've already installed 3 secret doors. And here's where it gets really interesting. This move has inspired other economies to start thinking differently. Southeast Asian nations, African economies, even parts of Europe are reevaluating how dependent they want to be on the U.S. dollar system and American trade policies. And when enough countries start shifting, the whole structure of global trade begins to tilt. America's monopoly on economic influence starts to erode, not because someone destroyed it outright, but because too many people stopped believing in it. Now, what's next? Let's not pretend the U.S. is just going to sit quietly and watch its market collapse without a counter move. Washington will try to apply pressure, political, economic, even military posturing if it has to. They might try to isolate India diplomatically. They'll definitely try to rally allies to impose coordinated tariffs or sanctions. But here's the catch. This isn't the same world it was 20 years ago. Allies aren't as loyal as they used to be, especially when their own economies are at stake. Countries will think twice before taking America's side if it means losing access to India's market of 1.4 billion people. The math doesn't lie. India is simply too big to ignore. And don't be fooled. This tariff war isn't going to be short. It's going to be a drawn-out chess game. America will make moves, India will counter, the markets will swing up and down, and in the middle of it all, new alliances will be formed. The real winner won't be the one who causes the other side to collapse, it'll be the one who adapts fastest to the new reality. And right now, India is moving with the agility of a startup, while America is moving with the bureaucracy of a 100-year-old corporation. There's also a generational factor at play. In America, younger investors and entrepreneurs are already looking outside the country for opportunities. They're not as attached to the idea of the U.S. as the unchallenged global leader. In India, the youth are fired up. They're seeing this as a moment in history where their country isn't just participating in global trade, it's shaping it. That kind of mindset shift is powerful. It creates momentum that's hard to stop. And here's the reality nobody in the old guard wants to admit. This crash might just be the beginning of a bigger reshuffling of global power, because once economic dominance starts slipping, it's almost impossible to get it back without massive structural changes. America would have to overhaul its trade policies, rebuild domestic manufacturing, and actually invest in real economic productivity instead of relying on financial engineering. And those are not overnight fixes. That's years, maybe decades of work. In the meantime, other players are going to rise. India is one of them. Now let me say this. If you're sitting there thinking this is just about two countries throwing tariffs at each other, you're missing the bigger picture. This is about the end of an era where one nation could dictate the terms of trade to everyone else. It's about the beginning of a multipolar economic world where power is shared, negotiated, and sometimes fought over. That's messy, that's unpredictable, but it's also inevitable. So what's next? Markets will keep shaking. Politicians will keep talking tough. Economists will keep writing long reports to justify their predictions. But beneath all that noise, the world's economic map is being redrawn. Supply chains will shift, new trade corridors will open, currencies will compete, and somewhere in the middle of all this, a new balance of power will emerge. The question isn't whether America can recover from this crash, it's whether it can adapt to a world where it's no longer the sole architect of the global economy. And if history has taught us anything, it's this. Once the tide turns, it doesn't ask anyone's permission to keep moving. The smart ones don't fight the tide. They learn to ride it. It marked the birth of India's assertive military doctrine backed by innovation. This is not just a market crisis. It's the start of a structural realignment in global economic power. People have to understand that events like this don't happen in isolation. They are part of a much bigger shift that's been building for years, sometimes decades, beneath the surface. The crash might be the headline, the tariffs might be the spark, but the story is far deeper. We are talking about the rewriting of the rules that have governed trade, finance, and geopolitical influence since the end of World War II. The old system was simple. The U.S. called the shots, the dollar reigned supreme, and military presence backed economic dominance. That formula worked for them for decades, until countries like India started asking a very dangerous question. What if we don't need to play by these rules anymore? This isn't just a case of a rising nation challenging the status quo. This is a moment when multiple trends converge. India has been quietly building economic and military independence, investing heavily in technology, defense manufacturing, and strategic alliances that don't require America's blessing. The military doctrine part is important because it ties directly into economics. In the past, a country's economic ambitions were always limited by its ability to defend itself. If you couldn't protect your trade routes, your resources, or your technological secrets, you couldn't truly challenge the global leader. But India's new approach, combining indigenous defense innovation with assertive strategic positioning, has removed that barrier. They aren't just defending their territory, they are projecting influence in regions where American dominance once went unquestioned. And that confidence in defense gives them the courage to take economic risks, like standing firm in a tariff war against the United States. What you have here is a shift from reactive policy to proactive power projection. India didn't just respond to American tariffs. It anticipated the possibility, built economic contingency plans, diversified its trade networks, and strengthened its internal industries to handle short-term shocks. This is why the crash hit America harder than India. One side had already been quietly preparing for an eventual confrontation. The other assumed the old playbook would still work. That assumption was the first major crack in America's economic armor. For decades, tariff wars worked in their favor because their targets lacked the infrastructure to endure the pressure. But India's doctrine, both military and economic, is built on the principle of withstanding and outlasting external pressure. This is a doctrine shaped not just by modern strategy, but by centuries of history, where survival meant adaptability, patience, and timing your counterstrike for maximum effect. The market crash, therefore, isn't just about a bad week on Wall Street. It's the visible symptom of a much larger disease. In the old global order, for decades the U.S. could impose economic penalties without significant blowback because it had unmatched leverage. But leverage is only leverage when the other party doesn't have an alternative. India has spent years building those alternatives. Alternative payment systems, alternative trade partners, alternative defense suppliers, and even alternative narratives in global diplomacy. This multi-front preparation means that while America's move caused turbulence, it didn't achieve the intended goal of forcing India into concessions. In fact, it had the opposite effect. It accelerated India's integration with other emerging economies that are just as tired of one-sided economic rules, and this is where the structural realignment begins. Once one major economy breaks free from the gravitational pull of the U.S. financial and trade system, others start asking whether they can do the same. You're already seeing early signs of this in the way Southeast Asian nations, parts of Africa, and even South American economies are increasing trade with India, China, and regional blocs instead of depending solely on the U.S. market. The dollar's dominance, once seen as unshakable, starts to look vulnerable when more transactions are settled in local currencies or through new digital payment infrastructures that bypass traditional Western controlled systems. This isn't the kind of change that happens overnight, but it is the kind that, once it starts, becomes almost impossible to reverse. America's market crash is thus both an immediate financial event and a symbolic one. It sends a message to investors worldwide that the safe bet on U.S. dominance might not be as safe as they thought. Money is emotional. It moves toward confidence and flees uncertainty. If the U.S. is seen as losing its ability to control outcomes in major economic disputes, capital will begin to flow elsewhere. And when those flows find new homes, in India, in other emerging markets, in new regional alliances, they create economic ecosystems that further weaken reliance on the old center of gravity. This is exactly how empires decline, not with a single battle lost, but with a slow shift in where wealth, trade, and innovation are concentrated. What makes this moment so critical is that India's rise is not just about taking a bigger share of the pie, it's about baking a different kind of pie altogether. In the old model, global power was concentrated in a handful of countries, and everyone else had to fit into that structure. In the new model emerging from this crisis, power is more distributed, alliances are more fluid, and trade flows are more resilient to political bullying. This is not good news for a country that built its dominance on the ability to dictate terms. For America, this means the tactics that worked in the past, sanctions, tariffs, political isolation, are now less effective and in some cases counterproductive. Every time they try to use those tools against a prepared and capable opponent, they risk accelerating their own loss of influence. It's also worth noting how deeply interconnected military capability is to this shift. When India talks about self-reliance, it's not just about making its own cars or smartphones. It's about making its own fighter jets, missile defense systems, naval carriers, and surveillance networks. These are not vanity projects. They are shields against coercion. When you can defend your borders and your trade routes, You can make economic decisions that serve your interests instead of someone else's. This is why the birth of India's assertive military doctrine matters so much to the global economy. It creates the space for India to act independently without fearing retaliation in the form of blockades, embargoes, or intimidation. And when other countries see that model working, they start considering how they can do the same. The United States, meanwhile, faces a dilemma it hasn't had to deal with in generations. To maintain its influence, it would have to genuinely compete on trade terms, on manufacturing quality, on technological innovation, without relying on the pressure tools it has used for so long. That means addressing deep internal weaknesses, decaying infrastructure, outsourcing of key industries, political polarization, and a financial system that prioritizes short-term profits over long-term stability. These are hard fixes, and they require time. But time is exactly what they don't have if they want to slow down this realignment. Every year that passes without structural reform is another year that India and others pull further ahead in building alternative systems. The structural realignment also has a cultural dimension. For decades, American soft power Hollywood, tech brands, lifestyle exports was part of its economic dominance. People bought American products not just because of quality, but because of the image that came with them. But in the new order, cultural influence is more localized, and India has been pushing its own cultural export. Cinema, cuisine, tech innovations, even traditional wellness industries into the global mainstream. These exports don't just generate revenue, they create familiarity, trust, and emotional connection, which in turn makes trade and political partnerships easier to form. Cultural capital becomes economic capital, and America's monopoly on it is long gone. Another critical part of this realignment is the shift in investor mindset. Large investment funds, sovereign wealth funds, and even private equity firms are increasingly looking at emerging markets not as high-risk gambles, but as essential parts of a balanced portfolio. India's economic resilience during the tariff war only reinforces that perception. When investors see that a country can take a hit from the United States and still keep moving forward, they start calculating that maybe the future growth curve is steeper there than in the aging economies of the West. Capital migration is subtle at first, but over time it compounds into a powerful force. More capital means more innovation, more infrastructure, and more economic leverage for the receiving countries. And this is where we circle back to the heart of the matter. The tariff war was not the end game, it was the opening act. The market crash is just the first visible crack in a wall that's been weakening for years. Behind the scenes, the foundations of global power are being rearranged, and the countries that adapt fastest to this new reality will set the tone for the next century. The U.S. still has immense resources, talent, and potential, but it no longer has an uncontested position. India's assertive military doctrine, paired with its economic strategy, has signaled to the world that there's more than one way to be a superpower. This is why calling it just a market crisis misses the point entirely. The stock charts will recover eventually, they always do, but the confidence, the psychological dominance, the automatic deference to U.S. economic power, that's what's eroding. And once that shift in mindset spreads, you don't go back to the old order. You move forward into something new, whether the old guard likes it or not. The tariff war didn't just shake up trade, it altered the gravitational pull of global economics. It was a declaration that the rules have changed and the world is now playing a different game altogether.